Welcome to Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge, a podcast for tech executives. We provide strategies and tactics to help executives succeed and further their career goals. With interviews from industry experts, leaders, and innovators, this show will surely get you on the edge of your seat with thought-provoking advice on how to stay ahead of the competition. Welcome to Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge, a podcast exploring the latest trends, strategies, and insights in technology leadership. We'll discuss the most important topics and ideas shaping the industry today, from emerging technologies to digital transformation and beyond. Join us to learn all the juicy secrets of tech leaders, from their biggest successes and failures, on our quest for gaining that all-important technology edge. So are you ready? Let's get started. Today's guest is Steve Kelly. Steve was a technical fellow at Motorola. He founded NetSolve, an early MSP, and later acquired by Cisco. After Cisco, he founded Argentil with two others. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Hi, good to be here.
So tell me about this latest company that you founded with your two partners.
Well, we saw some big problems while we were at Cisco, where something got built and got paid to be built, and then had to be rebuilt and didn't get paid to be rebuilt. And we sort of concluded, if that's the way cloud computing and stuff like digital transformation was going to work, there was a problem to solve there. And that's what we set out to solve. So Argentil is about deploying software, not writing software per se, but deploying software. And deploying software is done with more software. We're about automating that process.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, that's how all build tools work. So what problem are you solving?
So there's about 100 million hours a year, we estimate, of deployment software done with scripting. And the scripts are considered expendable. They're thrown away and not tracked. Why? Because they're not reusable. So what we're we're about making all those scripts that people have already written reusable and findable, and then allowing people to build what we call low-code workflows using the pieces that have already been written. 100 million hours of people doing $200 an hour work is a significant market to go penetrate and improve.
So who are your typical customers?
Well, we've worked a lot with the Air Force over the last 2 years, and that's really what allowed us to get on the map. This is what's called a dual use technology. Both the Air Force, or both the military and enterprise, have essentially the same problem. The Air Force believes it spends more money on deploying software than it does on writing it, which, if you think about it a minute, might sort of make sense. We also do a lot of work with a company called Worldwide Technologies out of St. Louis. And there we source engineers and we source them with our tools.
Well, that's really interesting. So my assumption was you weren't involved with the engineering at all. Is that correct?
That I'm not?
Well, just your company isn't actually involved with like software engineering.
Oh, no, we are. Not often development, more what's called operations. The term, if you've heard the term DevOps, okay, we're more the ops side of DevOps. Although there's a lot of testing on the dev side, and that tends to bleed back from operations as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I know. As a roving consultant that I did that for years, one of the biggest problems I saw at every company was deployment. Honestly, people are going to think I'm crazy to say this, but I think the second biggest problem was a lot of companies weren't using source control at all. But I actually found the deployment process more scary because you'd move things into an environment and you wouldn't really know if it had been a clean move, like did all the DLLs get copied in place, that sort of thing. And you didn't know that. And while not having source control was a pain in the neck, there were ways to ensure that didn't happen. You could use diff tools and whatnot. And I always used to laugh, like, we don't have time to install source control, but we're going to use a diff tool to determine if the file changed. Well, isn't that what source control does for you automatically? Yeah, seems kind of funny. And I've actually, when I worked at the Superior Court, I forced them to use source control because they were literally mapping a drive to where the code was, and everyone was working like wild, wild west in this code and overwriting everyone's work. So that was no fun. So let's go back a little bit. So you worked at Motorola as a technical fellow. Describe what that was like.
Well, when I got out of college, I got a job with Motorola in the marketing side, and eventually actually moved to operations. That was in semiconductor design. So I ran a group of people that design chips. A good place to start, still a good business, but I sort of moved on from there to, we thought some of the things we were building at Motorola, people were going to have a hard time figuring out how to use them. So the company NetSolve was a little bit about, okay, let us use them for you in a professional way. That's why we were doing remote network management and we're an early MSP. That got acquired by Cisco because we did it well, I would say. And then, as I say, we kind of came out of Cisco with this software problem that we thought was really going to impede the development of cloud. And that's how we got focused on deployment issues in clouds. You know, each cloud is different. And so even if you take a standard application, the way you deploy that on AWS or Azure or Google are different. And they all have their own tools. That's fine, but all of a sudden you decide to want to move from, let's say, Azure to AWS, and you've been using all these Azure tools. Now you're sort of stuck. You got to go learn all the AWS tools. Our approach is something that's platform agnostic and sits above all that, so that it's very good for hybrid cloud, and it gives you a standard way to deploy on any cloud you want to, or any private cloud you want to. That's sort of the evolution. Not semiconductors at all anymore, although they're inside everything.
Sure. Have you found though that many people make a choice of, say, using Azure and then they switch to AWS or vice versa?
I think everybody tends to start someplace. And then the typical thing that's talked about is, what if everybody changes, these clouds change their pricing approach and pricing amounts all the time. So once I get up and going, you'd like to be able to consider switching, if for no other reason to save price. Sometimes it's to get additional features. The Air Force, you've seen this in the press. The Air Force had a big dispute, actually the military and together, about whether they were going to be on AWS or Azure. They eventually decided both, but one of the things that made them interested in Argentil is that we were talking about the ability to go from one to the other easily.
Yeah, see, that's an interesting thing, because like I've had that experience as a business owner with like integrated tools where you think there's a lot of great features and you move to that tool and then you find out, well, it's lacking this, it's lacking that. I need to move over here. And that alone can be pretty painful. But when it's software that's running your enterprise, I have a client right now that their entire they do an integration into NetSuite, and their entire integration is in Azure. And their biggest problem is finding people who are developers who understand how to write the applications using the hooks that Azure gives them. But I kind of cringe when I see that, because as a guy who knows, well, at some point you're going to want to move, they're not going to be able to move super easily if they're using hooks. So that's interesting to me. And unfortunately, as far as I know, there's no like commonality between the two where you could write a conversion script that could switch things over for them or anything like that. So that's kind of interesting. So what size, I mean, obviously Air Force, that's a huge customer. What size customer are you targeting?
This is probably Fortune 2000. So it is applicable. It's a means of organizing large DevOps or DevSecOps teams, because and it reaches down fairly far, but the broad concept is this is an organizational tool. Once you get all the technology down below it, it's an organizational tool. You let your experts write libraries. And the libraries, they certainly have to be coders just like developers. But if you write the libraries right, then the workflow tool lets you reuse them over and over again. And the people doing the day-to-day work don't have to be coders. That's a big, big change for both enterprise and military, and can make a big difference in how they operate and how they scale.
When you had made a comment earlier about intellectual property. So
Yes.
how does your tool address that?
Well, so let's, smaller companies do development. They write applications or they write workloads is the broader term. And some of them actually put that on the balance sheet. In other words, the labor that went into building that code is considered reusable and therefore is considered an invested asset, and they put it on their balance sheet as an asset. Strangely, scripts are rewritten, written again, thrown away, not even tracked, and lost all the time. So we consider that, and we're trying, by making that stuff reusable, we're generating a new IP that's basically in most organizations a hidden IP. And I'll go a little further with that. What we found with some of the big enterprises, they may have more than 1 million scripts, but they don't know where they are. And so we built an ASCOT tool to help them go find them. Now, the next problem is they don't know where they are, but when they find them, they don't know what they're for. And so we use machine learning tools to go describe the scripts and put a lot of information around them so that someone who didn't write a script could go find a script and reuse it. Then we add the things that make them reusable, which is a whole bunch of stuff in the world of what's called parsing, but I won't go too deep there. But that's the adept tool. So there's ASCOT and there's adept, and those are the two tools. If you don't know where your stuff is, you start with ASCOT. If you do know where your stuff is, you just load it into adept, and we'll help you go forward from there.
That's ingenious, because I mean, I haven't done enterprise level coding myself for probably 5 years. Any coding I do these days is mostly for my own business and my own personal reasons. But tool like this would have helped a lot, because it actually is true. A lot of times people write like a deployment script, for instance. They'll write that out, they'll run it, and then never remember that they had it, and write it again the next time, something similar. And then invariably someone will say, well, but wait, last time it managed to set this setting for us, and this time we didn't do that. Well, yeah, that's because we forgot. I mean, that's really what happened there.
Yep.
So I think it's pretty cool that you can not only try to locate where those scripts are, but then tell them what the script is about. Because I mean, that's obviously more than half, in my opinion, more than half the battle is, what the heck is this thing for, and why am I using it? And no one documents anything anymore. So I one time had a junior developer say to me, why are you writing that stuff in the header of the function? Because so people understand what it's for. Well, doesn't that make the script even more bloated? And like, not enough that's going to make any difference. Like,
No.
Trust me, later when you go to look at this, you see this here, you're going to be happy it's here, because you're going to know what the heck that function does versus some of these others that you don't. Well, that's really interesting, and I think it's an interesting problem to try to solve. Who are like your major competitors?
Well, the worst thing you can say as an entrepreneur is that we don't have a competitor. There are lots of things out there in the space. People would generally start with maybe GitHub, but we go way beyond GitHub. They use languages like Chef, Puppet, Ansible, Terraform, Salt Stack, Bash, PowerShell, all that stuff.
Yep.
Those we work with all of those. We don't compete with them. We're not only platform agnostic, but language agnostic. So you bring the script you've written to us in whatever language you wrote them in, and we're going to process them that way. And we're going to make it so that the low-code workflows I mentioned could contain 5 different languages. So in that sense, we're an abstraction layer above the scripting work that's being done. There are other automation tool approaches out there, but most of those are kind of manually doing the automation. And we would argue that we are automating automation. We have tools to make it automated. So that's our differentiation. There's a ton of people in the space. We're like some of them, sort of, but we think we're a little different.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question, because I kind of get that feeling that you're kind of one layer above what other people are doing, which is a big differentiation factor. Excuse me.
And I'll just back to that's part of why in the end, when you encompass all the technology, we're just an organization tool. Bring the stuff you have and we'll get it in a form that makes it reusable and organize it for you.
So who typically in a company would you approach about showing them your tool?
Well, we want to approach like CTOs and VP of engineering types, because they recognize the money saving that can come from this. When it works right, you can save 90% of the labor. And then you worry about, well, aren't those people going to lose their jobs? No, there's a ton of things they'd rather be doing than staying up all night pounding on keyboards. So that's not really a problem. So we want to approach organizations at a fairly high level and work down, but then you also are going to, there's a million engineers that are going to be influencers, and you need to be able to talk kind of a different language with them. So it's always a two-level sale.
Yeah, that makes sense, because the engineers are going to be the ones who are going to make the most time savings, and they're going to find this tool extremely helpful and useful for their workflows. And they need to communicate that to their management. Otherwise, their management may think that there's no problem at all. That's something, I mean, I coach my clients on this all the time, that, you know, we talk about, I mostly teach them how to get work-life balance. That's a big problem that CTOs have.
Yes.
And one of the aspects is communicating with upper management. And I get a lot of like surprise stares when I say that to people. And then I explain, if your upper management has no idea what's going on in your department, they're going to put a lot of pressure on you at all times, asking a lot of questions, etc. But if you're transparent and you let them know exactly what's going on, including problems, well, then when you come up with a solution to a problem that maybe is outside your budget or wasn't budgeted this year, and you want to go to bat for some money for that, at least they're going to understand why. You don't have to like educate them and then sell them on the idea. They're already educated, and they understand you, and they've been with you on the journey of solving the problem. And so they're probably also at the point, I would guess, more likely to sign off on that immediately, because, hey, they've been through the journey. It's the people who kind of only tell their bosses the positives, and, oh, we just finished this and we just finished that. They don't understand that they're actually putting a lot of pressure on themselves by doing that, because you're not saving yourself anything by hiding the problems from your boss. They need to know what's going on. So I think same thing, you know, engineers, they've got to let their direct report know that, you know, this is a struggle we're having, and this tool could solve that struggle in about 75 different ways, you know. I'm
sorry.
No, go ahead.
We can come in from the bottom and work your way up. Obviously, the sales approach is to come from the top down, but we do find that sometimes the executives don't know anything about scripting. They don't know they do scripting. They might know they get stuff deployed, but they don't know how it's done. It's sort of the hidden underbelly of the organization. And so we have to educate in both directions a lot.
That's really interesting, because I've seen that trend developing where they, in order to like you mentioned before, like people will say, oh, well, if you're going to save 90% of the time, maybe you're going to put some people out of work. I've seen so many times where they'll take a person who maybe was a COBOL programmer for lots of years, and they'll move them in as like the leader of a team that does .NET programming, and they think, oh, it's easy, they'll figure it out. But really, they struggle with that. And, you know, maybe they're great managers, but from the technical perspective, you've kind of put them in a tight spot now because they know nothing about this work. I actually had a project once where the gentleman, that exact situation was going on, and he came back from a meeting one day all proud that he had defended us. And he said they want two things done really, really soon. They want to see this button right here. They want to move the button to the right side of the screen. I told them 2 weeks for that. Well, we could have that done in 5 minutes. Then he said, and I told them that then they want this entire table to be sortable every column. I told them that they could have tomorrow. We laugh, and then we laugh and say, you have that reversed. So you know, go back to them and explain it to them. But he didn't know any better, because he didn't know what it took to do any of those things. So that's interesting. So they're kind of in that position. But I guess if they have a good, strong team that can advise them, then that's not that big of a problem.
If they listen. I'll say one of the things I've learned as an executive over the years, most people get started because they're good type A people, right? They go solve everything. When you actually get in charge, you need to switch to type B and be a listener and speak last instead of first. It's amazing what a difference that makes. Then you can manage your team, even if you're not an expert in what they do. If you don't do that, you're just silly. So,
well, yeah, and I think that person with a technical background in general could manage a technical team that they don't necessarily understand the technology, as long as they listen, because you know, listening is learning mode. Talking is not. It's not learning.
Yes.
But listening's learning mode. And if you go into learning mode and you pay attention to what's going on around you and what your team is saying to you, suddenly the whole world changes for you, and you understand the problems that are going on. And even then, maybe you don't understand everything that's under the hood of the technology, but you're grasping the problems that your team is facing. And I often wonder, like, how do these leaders become successful? Because just being the guy who knows everything and can solve everything, that ends at some point. It definitely ends at some point. You will
has to end. Yes.
Yeah, you'll hit the ceiling, and then you suddenly find yourself, oh my gosh, you know, I've screwed up everything. I've made this huge mess now, and now I have to fix it. So that's actually a good thing, being humble. So, well, this has been an interesting conversation. I think your toolism is amazing. How long have you guys been had this tool in existence?
We started it in 2013. However, we were idle for 2 or 3 years because we ran out of money. So the first piece was done in 2014, and then we picked up again with the Air Force in 2019.
Kudos for you for sticking that out.
Yeah, entrepreneurship takes persistence.
Yeah, no,
wins and losses too.
Well, no, it's true. It's like, you know, it's like I say in the opening to the show, you know, we talk about big successes and failures, because I'm a big believer that you learn more from the failures than from the successes anyway. I'm a chess player, and they always recommend, you know, don't analyze your wins, analyze your losses. And
yes,
you always want to analyze your wins because it's you want to admire what you did. But the reality is you did well in that one. There's really no reason to analyze that one. It's the one you didn't do well in. You got to figure out what you didn't do well in.
So real quick, I coach basketball too. And yes, the time to coach is when you lose. They'll listen then. And that's true all the way up into the pros.
I used to coach roller hockey, and I'd get parents that would be upset with me that, like, oh, well, you didn't correct him during the game. That's not when I correct him. I correct him at practice. I don't correct him here during the game, unless it's something simple like, you know, instead of going to the left, go to the of that person, go to the right of that person. But I'm not going to sit there and give them a lesson on, like, you know, how to trap a person in the zone or something during a game. It's just not, they're not paying attention. They don't care. They want to play the game. It's at practice that you practice those things. So that's really where being a coach, good coaches and bad coaches get separated, is right there. A lot of times you'll see, like, professional coaches, watch the hockey playoffs going on right now. Those coaches are trying to vie for the biggest prize, and they're standing there saying nothing during the game. They're observing, they're learning what's going on in the game, and they're thinking about what adjustments they can make to overcome the problems that they're seeing. They're certainly not going, man, I need to teach so-and-so how to do a slap shot. You know, that's not on their mind right now. So, well, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you, in case they want to reach out and maybe they have a need for your software as well?
Sure. You can reach Argentil at info.argentil, ARGANTEAL. I hope I spelled it right. ARGANTEAL.com. And you can reach me at skelly, KELLEY, at argentil.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'll make sure this gets into the show notes and to the video description so people don't have to scramble with a
Sure.
pen. But thank you so much for your time and all the great information that you shared with us today. Listeners are going to love it. So
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
all right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge. We hope you had a great time with us learning everything you need to know to stay ahead of the technology curve. Remember, be curious, be updated on the latest trends, and show them who's the boss. Until next time, we'll be back with plenty more techie tips and tricks so you can stay on top of your game.